you healing me? God, why didn't you heal my kids? They all passed away. God, why didn't you? This was a question that Job knew greater than any one of us. The suffering that he experienced was insane. And yet, here was part of Job's conclusion in Job chapter 13, verse 15. In the midst of Job's brokenness, in the midst of his pain and suffering, Job says this prayer, which is absolutely incredible. It says, though he slay me, I will hope in him. What? Though he slay me, Job says, I will hope in him. Job, again, had experienced the loss of everything. Job's prayers were not being answered. Prayers for healing for his kids, prayers for his sickness, none of it was being answered. And yet, Job says, though I'm being slayed, though everything is being taken from me, my health, my family, I've already lost it all. He says, though all that is being taken, he says, I will hope in him. Isn't that incredible? Job still had hope because, again, his hope wasn't in anything other than God himself. His hope wasn't that, I hope my kids do get better. I hope that my health does come back. Those are great things to hope for and pray for, but Job's ultimate hope was in God himself. And if our hope is in anything besides God, our ultimate hope, the reality is we're going to be let down. We're going to be let down time and time again. If our hope is only God, heal me or heal them in this lifetime, even if God answers that prayer, and sometimes he does, that is only temporary. That is a temporary hope. Think about Lazarus in John chapter 11. Jesus raised his friend Lazarus from the dead. They prayed for him. He was raised from the dead. Oh my gosh, amazing. Jesus, thank you for raising the dead. You answered our prayers. You healed him. This is amazing. Well, guess what? Lazarus died later. He didn't stay alive forever. So the hope of God, answer this prayer, heal Lazarus, raise him from the dead. Sometimes God says, I will. And it's, oh my gosh, thank you, that's amazing. But that is not an eternal thing. That was a temporary blessing, a temporary answer to prayer. He ended up again dying. And so all healing, we got to understand this, that we do experience on this earth, which at times God does choose to heal. God does choose to answer our prayer and say, yes, I will take this away. But all healing that we experience in this life is temporary and imperfect. And we got to get that. Because if our ultimate hope is healing, here and now, we're missing it. We're going to be left without hope. The healing that Jesus came to provide, though, is a healing that was eternal and a healing that was perfect. All that we have in this life is imperfect and temporary, but the healing that Jesus came to provide, our hope is rooted in the eternal work of Jesus, whereby we have a hope, and we have healing, and we have an eternal hope. It's in the person of Jesus. It's in what he did, and we're going to talk about this in a second. But we gotta get the facts straight here again. If my ultimate hope and your ultimate hope is, God, heal this person, which is a good desire and a good thing to pray. God, heal myself. Even if you choose to say yes, that is temporary. My hope is not in that he will heal me, that he will heal them. My hope is in God. That's what Job said. And Paul the Apostle, likewise, another case study, if you do this, if you look at the life of Paul the Apostle, probably in the New Testament, suffered more than any other person besides Jesus. And we see an example of this in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. I want you to see this here. Paul the Apostle, again, we're talking about the guy here who wrote over half the New Testament. You would think, wow, okay, yeah, perfect life, happy life, right? No, not at all. What we see here, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, look what Paul prays starting in verse 7. Paul writes, to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of revelations. That is all the revelations he got from God. He wrote over half the Testament. He says, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. We don't know exactly what the thorn in the flesh is. Most biblical scholars believe that it was some sort of physical infirmity that he had, and he referred to it as a thorn in my flesh. And he was like, man, this is hard. I don't want this. I don't like this. Whatever this thorn in the flesh was that created some sort of suffering, we don't know exactly, but we do know this. Look at verse 8. He says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. He says, God, I prayed to you. heal me of this. Take this away, the thorn in my flesh. But, verse 9, he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, Paul says, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, he says, then I am strong. Paul says, I'm suffering. Paul says, I have a thorn in the flesh. Paul says, I prayed to God, take this away from me. And God's response to Paul's prayer for heal me isn't, okay, Paul, I will heal you. That's not what God does for Paul the apostle, the man who penned half the New Testament. But rather, God says, I am going to use this suffering in your life to draw you closer to myself. I want you to see this. God did not remove the problem. What he did was added his presence. Do you see that? He didn't say, yes, Paul, I will take away what you're praying for. He said, my grace is sufficient for you. My power will be made perfect in your weakness. And so often, we're so stuck on, God, take this away. I'm praying, I'm asking, take this away. And